You know what silence sounds like? Not the peaceful kind. Not the kind where you close your eyes and relax. I'm talking about the silence that comes right after a mortar shell explodes 3 buildings down from yours. That 3-second gap where the entire world holds its breath. Where you're checking your own body for holes. Where you're wondering if the screaming you're about to hear will be from someone you love. That was my soundtrack for 1,425 days. 4 years. Nearly 4 full years. I was 16 when it started. A normal teenager in Sarajevo, worried about girls, about passing my exams, about whether I'd make the football team. I went to sleep one night in a normal city, in a normal country, living a normal life. I woke up in a war zone that would become the longest siege in modern warfare, longer than Leningrad, longer than anything Europe had seen since World War II. My name is Amir, and this is how I survived the Siege of Sarajevo. And I need to warn you right now, this isn't going to be a Hollywood version. There were no heroes swooping in to save us, no dramatic music playing while we overcame impossible odds. Just ordinary people trying to survive one more day, one more hour, one more shelling. So if you're ready to hear what it's really like when your entire world collapses around you, when your city becomes a shooting gallery and you're the target, then stay with me, because this is a story that needs to be told. Let me take you back to 1991. Sarajevo was, God, it was beautiful. You have to understand that first. You have to know what we lost. Picture a city nestled in a valley, surrounded by mountains that look like they're embracing you. The Miljacka River running right through the center. Ottoman architecture mixing with Austro-Hungarian buildings mixing with brutalist Yugoslav concrete. Mosques next to Catholic churches, next to Orthodox churches, next to synagogues. We called it the Jerusalem of Europe, but honestly, it was better than that. Because we actually got along. My best friend was Bosnian Serb. My neighbor was Croat. The girl I had a crush on, Amina, she was Bosniak like me. We'd all go to the same cafes, the same parks, the same schools. Nobody cared about your ethnicity. Not really. I mean, we knew the differences existed. Of course we did. But it was like knowing someone was left-handed or preferred tea over coffee. Just a fact, not a reason to hate someone. The 1984 Winter Olympics had been in Sarajevo. Our mountains, our ski slopes, our city on the world stage. We were proud. We were modern. We were Yugoslav. And that word, Yugoslav, it meant something then. It meant we were all in this together. My father worked as an engineer. My mother was a school teacher. We lived in a decent apartment in the Grbavica neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. 3 bedrooms, a balcony where my mother grew tomatoes in the summer, a living room where we'd gather to watch television. I remember my biggest worry in March of 1992 was whether I'd get a new pair of Adidas trainers for my birthday. Crazy, right? But there were signs. If you knew where to look. Yugoslavia was falling apart. Slovenia had declared independence in 1991. Croatia followed. There was fighting. We'd see it on the news. But it felt distant, like something happening in another country. We didn't realize we were the other country, that we were next. I remember my uncle visiting us in February 1992. He lived in a village outside Sarajevo, and he seemed nervous, paranoid even. He kept talking about how the Serbs in his village were acting strange, stockpiling weapons, having secret meetings. My father told him to relax. "This is Bosnia," he said. "We've lived together for generations. Nothing's going to happen here." My father was wrong. On March 1st, 1992, Bosnia and Herzegovina held a referendum on independence. Most Bosniaks and Croats voted yes. Most Serbs boycotted it. The next day, a Serbian wedding party was attacked in Sarajevo. A guest was killed, and that was it. The match that lit the fuse. Within hours, barricades went up across the city. Serb paramilitaries took control of major roads. Suddenly, Sarajevo was divided. Neighborhoods that had been mixed for decades were now on opposite sides of a conflict nobody fully understood yet. My father came home early from work that day. His face was gray. "Pack a bag," he told me and my younger sister, Lejla. "Just essentials. We might need to leave." "Leave? Leave where?" My mother's voice was shaking. "I don't know, but pack anyway." We didn't leave. Where would we have gone? That's the thing people don't understand about war. When it comes, you don't just evacuate like it's a fire drill. You have your whole life in one place. Your job, your home, your friends, your family who can't travel easily. You keep thinking it'll blow over, that sanity will return. You wait too long, and then you can't leave at all. April 5th. That's the date we mark as the beginning of the siege, though it really started earlier. There was supposed to be a peace demonstration. Thousands of people, Serbs, Croats, Bosniaks, everyone, gathered in front of the Parliament building, united, trying to show that we didn't want this war. Snipers opened fire from the Holiday Inn hotel. People scattered, screaming. I wasn't there, thank God, but we watched it on television, saw people running, falling, helping each other. The first deaths of the siege. A medical student named Swada Dilberovic was killed. She was just 24. The main bridge in Sarajevo, Vrbanja Bridge, would later be renamed after her. That night, the shelling started. I'll never forget that sound. Never. It's not like in the movies where you hear a whistle and then an explosion. It's more sudden than that. A crack that splits the air, then a boom that you feel in your chest, then the sound of debris raining down. We huddled in our hallway, the safest place in the apartment, away from windows. My sister was crying. My mother was praying. My father sat with his back against the wall, smoking cigarette after cigarette, even though my mother usually never let him smoke inside. "It'll be over soon," he kept saying. "A few days at most. The international community won't allow this." I wanted to believe him. We all wanted to believe him. The first week was chaos and confusion. The Yugoslav People's Army, the JNA, surrounded the city. They positioned artillery and tanks in the mountains, those same beautiful mountains that had embraced us. Now they were weapons pointed at our heads. You have to understand the geography to understand the siege. Sarajevo sits in a valley. Hills and mountains on all sides. Militarily speaking, it's the worst possible position. We were in a bowl, and they had the high ground. Every strategic position around the city, every hilltop, every ridge, was occupied by Serb forces. They could see everything. They could hit anything. The Bosnian government forces, barely organized at that point, controlled only the city center and some neighborhoods. We had light weapons, hunting rifles, some police pistols, a few AK-47s. They had tanks, artillery, mortars, heavy machine guns, an entire army's worth of equipment. The siege wasn't a battle. It was a massacre waiting to happen, a slow-motion execution of an entire city. In that first week, the airport was captured by Serb forces. The main roads out of the city were cut off. We were surrounded, trapped. 400,000 people, locked in a box while the world watched. My school closed, obviously. All schools closed. The teachers didn't know if they'd reopen in a week or a month. It would be 4 years. I remember my mother trying to maintain some normalcy. She'd make us sit at the kitchen table and do lessons from our textbooks, math problems, grammar exercises, as if any of that mattered when mortars were falling outside. But I understand now why she did it. She was fighting her own war, the war against despair, against giving up. If we stopped being students, stopped being a family with routines and rules, we'd just be victims waiting to die. So we did math problems while the city burned. Let me tell you about the snipers. Because the shelling was terrifying, yes. Random death from above. But you could hide from mortars. You could stay away from windows, stay in your hallway or basement, wait for the barrage to end. Snipers were different. Snipers made every open space a potential death zone. Every street crossing, every intersection, every window. They were positioned all around the city, in the hills, in tall buildings on the front lines. They had scopes, they had patience, and they had orders to shoot anything that moved. Men, women, children, didn't matter. There was this one spot. We called it Sniper Alley. Ulika Zmaja od Bosna, a main boulevard that you had to cross if you wanted to move between different parts of the city. The snipers had a perfect view of it from the hills. People would gather at the edge of buildings, working up courage. You'd see them taking deep breaths, psyching themselves up, and then they'd run. Full sprint, zigzagging if they were smart. Most made it across. Some didn't. I saw a man get shot once. I was 14. Sorry, I was 16 by then. Getting older during the siege was strange because time moved differently. Anyway, I saw him. He was running across the street with a bag of something, bread maybe, or water, the crack of the rifle. He stumbled, dropped the bag, fell. People rushed out to pull him to safety, risking their own lives. That was the thing about Sarajevo. We never lost our humanity, even when they tried to take it from us. The man survived, I heard later. Shot in the leg. Others weren't so lucky. There was a young couple. I didn't know them personally, but everyone knew their story. Admira Izmic and Boško Brkic. She was Bosniak. He was Serb. They were trying to escape the city together, crossing a bridge. Snipers shot them both. They died in each other's arms in the middle of the bridge. Their bodies lay there for days because it was too dangerous to retrieve them. If that doesn't tell you the insanity of this war, nothing will. A Serb and a Bosniak in love, killed by people claiming to protect ethnic interests. After the first month, you start to adapt. Humans are incredible that way. We can normalize almost anything. We developed routines, survival protocols. Water was the first crisis. The city's water supply was cut within weeks. All those pipes coming from the mountains, controlled by Serb forces. They could turn them on or off at will, usually off. There were a few public wells and pumps scattered around the city. Every day, people would line up with plastic containers, jerry cans, buckets, whatever they could find. You'd wait in line for hours, completely exposed, while snipers watched. They'd shoot at the lines sometimes, just to terrorize us, to make even basic survival a deadly risk. My job? Because at 16 I became the man of the house while my father was away trying to work with the defense forces, was to get water. Every other day, I'd take our blue plastic containers and walk 6 blocks to the nearest pump. 6 blocks doesn't sound like much, right? Try doing it while calculating sniper angles in your head, while choosing which side of the street has better cover, while listening for the whistle of incoming mortars, while running in short bursts from doorway to doorway. I'd come home exhausted, adrenaline shaking, with 20 liters of water. Barely enough for drinking and basic washing for a family of 4 for 2 days. No showers, no laundry, no flushing toilets unless absolutely necessary. We smelled. Everyone smelled. The whole city reeked of unwashed bodies and uncollected garbage. But you stopped noticing after a while. Food was the second crisis. The siege cut off all supply lines. No trucks coming in, no deliveries. The grocery stores sold out within days, and there was nothing to restock them with. People started hoarding whatever they had. Families who'd stored preserves and canned goods became the lucky ones. Everyone else scrambled. The UN eventually started bringing in humanitarian aid, sea rations mostly, military surplus food from the Gulf War, canned beans, crackers, mysterious meat in tins. It all tasted like cardboard, but it kept you alive, if you could get it. Distribution was chaotic. You'd hear that aid was being given out at a certain location, and thousands of people would converge. More lines, more exposure, more targets for snipers. I stood in a bread line for 7 hours. It's 7 hours, in the cold, stomach cramping with hunger, just to get 2 loaves of bread. Worth it. They cut the electricity in the summer of '92. Suddenly, we weren't just living in a war zone. We were living in the dark ages. No lights, no refrigeration, no television, no radio except battery-powered ones, and batteries were precious. Winter was coming, and without electricity, there was no heat. Let me tell you about Sarajevo winters. They're not mild. We're talking -15, -20 Celsius. Snow piling up, wind cutting through every gap in your windows, and we had no heat. People started burning everything. Furniture, books, park benches, trees, doors from abandoned apartments. You'd see families chopping up their own wardrobes just to stay warm for one more night. I remember the day we burned my grandmother's old dining table, a beautiful wooden table that had been in the family for generations. My mother cried as we took an axe to it. But we needed the warmth more than we needed the memories. The city's parks, once green and beautiful, were stripped bare. Every tree cut down for firewood. The famous Hastahana Park looked like a wasteland by the first winter, just stumps and mud. At night, the city went completely dark. No streetlights, no house lights, nothing. The only illumination came from fires, people burning whatever they could, and from the flashes of explosions. The muzzle flare of guns, tracer rounds arcing through the sky. It was medieval, grotesque, like someone had taken a modern European city and dropped it into some hellish past. We'd huddle around our small stove, fashioned from a metal drum and some pipes, burning wood we'd scavenged, trying to cook whatever food we had. Usually just rice or beans if we were lucky. Sometimes just hot water with a stock cube. Luxury was a can of meat. Heaven was coffee. Real coffee became worth its weight in gold. Literally. People traded jewelry for coffee beans. We drank substitutes made from burnt barley, roasted chickpeas, anything that could be ground and steeped. It tasted awful, but it was hot and it was something to do. A small piece of normalcy. Here's where I need to tell you about the tunnel. The Sarajevo Tunnel, our lifeline. By early 1993, we'd been under siege for almost a year. The city was slowly dying. People were starving. Disease was spreading. Without supplies, without a way to bring in food, weapons, medicine. We were finished, but the airport was a problem. The UN controlled the airport, and they wouldn't let us use it. They were neutral, they said. Couldn't be seen helping one side. So we went under it. Some brilliant, desperate people had an idea. Dig a tunnel underneath the airport runway. Connect the besieged city to the free territory on the other side, where the Bosnian government still controlled some land. They started digging in March 1993. By hand, by shovel, under constant shelling. The tunnel was about 800 meters long, just tall enough to crouch in, narrow, muddy, supported by wooden frames and sheer hope. It took months to complete, but when it opened in July 1993, everything changed. Not everything. We were still trapped, still being shelled, still starving, but now we had a connection. A trickle of supplies could come through. Weapons for the defenders, food for the people, a way for the wounded to get out to hospitals. I went through the tunnel once. Only once. My father had managed to make contact with some distant relatives on the other side, in government-held territory. They had food, medicine. My mother was sick, weak from malnutrition. We needed help. So my father and I went through the tunnel. Getting to the tunnel entrance itself was dangerous. It was in a house in the Butmir neighborhood, which was under constant fire. We had to time our approach, running between shellings. The house looked ordinary from the outside. Inside there was a hole in the floor leading down into darkness. The tunnel was a nightmare. Water up to your ankles. Mud. The smell of diesel fuel from the pumps keeping the water out. Cables running along the ceiling. They'd eventually run electricity through. Rails for carts and people. Hundreds of people moving in both directions. Some bringing food in, some helping wounded get out. some just trying to reach family. It was hot, suffocating. The air was thick and hard to breathe. My father held my shoulder as we crouched and shuffled forward, step after step after step, for what felt like hours but was probably 45 minutes. I was terrified the tunnel would collapse, that the Serbs would bomb it, that I'd die underground, crushed by dirt, never seeing the sky again. But we made it through. The other side was like another world, still war-torn, still dangerous, but free. You could walk around without calculating sniper angles. There were supplies. The air smelled different. We met our relatives, got the medicine we needed, some food. We couldn't carry much. Had to make the return journey. Going back through that tunnel, knowing I was heading back into the siege, was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But that's what you did. You went back. Because your family was there, your home was there, your people were there. You want to know something beautiful and terrible at the same time? The Sarajevo Roses. When a mortar shell exploded on asphalt or concrete, the shrapnel would create this pattern, a blast mark. It looked almost like a flower, the way the shrapnel spread out in all directions, leaving scars in the pavement. They called them Sarajevo Roses. After the war, they filled some of these blast marks with red resin, memorials to the people who died in those spots. You can still see them today if you visit Sarajevo. Red flowers of violence blooming on grey concrete. During the siege, though, they weren't memorials. They were just places where people had died. I learned to read the city by its scars. You'd see a fresh blast mark and know, someone died there yesterday, maybe hours ago. You'd avoid that spot, not out of superstition, but because if they shelled it once, they might shell it again. The city became a map of death. Every street corner had a story, every building had holes in it. Some buildings were completely destroyed, just shells with empty windows staring out like dead eyes. The National Library was burned in August 1992, deliberately targeted. Thousands of books, centuries of history, gone. The sky rained ash for days. People tried to save what they could, running into the burning building, risking their lives for books. Because that's what this war was really about. They weren't just trying to kill us. They were trying to erase us, erase our culture, our history, proof that we'd ever existed as a people. But here's what they didn't count on. We refused to be erased. Even during the worst of it, Sarajevans refused to give up being human. I know that sounds dramatic, but it's true. Despite the shelling, despite the snipers, despite everything, people found ways to live. To really live, not just survive. There was this cellist, Vedran Smilovic. You might have heard of him. When a mortar shell killed 22 people standing in a bread line, he put on his concert clothes, took his cello, and sat in the crater where they died. He played Albinoni's Adagio in G minor. For 22 days, one day for each person killed. In the open, exposed to snipers, playing. That's what it meant to be Sarajevan. That's resistance. People organized underground concerts, art exhibitions in basements, theater performances, a fashion show on the streets during a ceasefire, models walking down Sniper Alley in beautiful clothes, a middle finger to the people trying to reduce us to animals. Miss Besieged Sarajevo. They held a beauty pageant. Can you imagine? In 1993, while people were starving, while the city was being destroyed, they held a beauty pageant. The winner, Inela Nogic, said something I'll never forget. We wanted to show that we are still human beings, that we still have our dignity. Dignity, that's what they couldn't take from us. The newspaper Oslobođenje, Liberation, kept publishing. Every single day of the siege, their building was destroyed, so they moved to a basement. They worked by candlelight. They dodged shells to distribute papers, because news mattered, truth mattered, telling our story mattered. Radio stations kept broadcasting, DJs playing music, reading messages from separated families, providing news, keeping people connected. Football matches. People actually organized football matches during ceasefires. Kids playing in bombed-out streets, adults kicking a ball around just to feel normal for an hour. My friend and I, his name was Amir, we'd sneak up to a destroyed building's upper floor sometimes. Dangerous as hell because snipers, but the view was incredible. We'd look out over the city and just talk. About normal stuff. About what we'd do after the war, where we'd travel, what we'd study. He wanted to be an architect. Rebuild the city. He didn't make it. Killed by a random mortar in 1995. Just bad luck. Wrong place, wrong time. I think about him a lot. About all the futures that were stolen. February 5th, 1994. Markale Market. It was Saturday. Market day. People were shopping for what little food was available. Just trying to live their lives. A 120mm mortar shell landed in the middle of the crowd. 68 people killed instantly. Over 140 wounded. I wasn't there. Thank God I wasn't there. But I knew people who were. The images. I can't get them out of my head even now. Body parts, blood everywhere, the screaming, the smell. It was the deadliest single attack of the siege up to that point, and the world finally paid attention. For a moment, NATO issued ultimatums. The shelling decreased for a while, but not for long. Then, August 28th, 1995. Markale Market again. Another mortar. 43 people killed. Another 100 wounded. Why target a marketplace? Why deliberately aim at civilians shopping for food? Because terror was the point. Because they wanted to break us. Because they wanted us to flee or die. After the second massacre, NATO finally acted. Operation Deliberate Force. They bombed Serb positions around the city. Too late for so many. But it was something. I need to talk about the children, because I was 16 when it started, technically still a child myself. But I'm talking about the younger ones, the kids who grew up knowing nothing but war. My sister Lejla was 13 when the siege began, 17 when it ended. Her entire adolescence was war. She never had a normal childhood after that. No school dances, no teenage parties, no learning to drive or worrying about boys or any of the things teenagers should worry about. Her concerns were, will we have food today? Will a shell hit our building? Will my brother come back from getting water? There were kids younger than her. Kids who were 5, 6, 7 when it started. They didn't remember peace. They thought this was normal. Thought all cities had snipers and mortars. Thought all kids had to run zigzag to avoid being shot. I remember seeing a group of children playing in a bombed-out building. They were playing war, acting out battles, pretending to shoot each other, but it wasn't like when we used to play as kids, making gun sounds with our mouths. These kids knew exactly what it looked like when someone got shot. They'd fall and play dead with horrifying accuracy. What do you do with a generation that grew up like that? How do you undo that damage? Over 1,600 children were killed during the siege. 1,600. Not soldiers, not armed combatants. Children, shot by snipers while playing. Killed by mortars while walking to get water. Dead from disease and starvation. There was a girl in our building, Nirma. She was 8 when it started. She loved to draw. Her mother would give her precious paper and a pencil, and she'd draw pictures of what she remembered from before the war. Parks with trees, the zoo, people smiling. She drew what she hoped the future would look like. A shell hit our building in 1994. Nirma and her mother were in their apartment. They both died. I helped carry their bodies out. Nirma still had her sketchbook clutched in her hand. Tell me what that child did to deserve that. Tell me what any of them did. By the winter of 1993 to 1994, the second winter, starvation was killing as many people as the shells. The UN aid wasn't enough. The tunnel helped, but it couldn't supply an entire city. Food prices on the black market were insane, when there was any food to buy at all. People ate grass, pigeons, rats, stray dogs and cats disappeared from the streets. I'm not exaggerating. I'm not being dramatic for effect. People ate anything they could find that had calories. My mother's friend boiled leather belts to make soup. The gelatin in the leather provided some nutrition. It tasted like, I don't even know how to describe it, like despair. We were luckier than most. My father had some connections, and we occasionally got a little extra through the Defense Force networks. But even we went days with almost nothing. I lost 20 kilos during the siege. 20. I was a skinny teenager anyway. I became skeletal. My mother lost even more. Her cheeks hollowed out. Her eyes sank into her skull. She looked decades older. You know what hunger does to you? Real hunger, not I missed lunch hunger. First, you think about food constantly, every moment. You dream about it. You remember meals from before the war with perfect clarity. The taste of burek, fresh bread with kajmak, cevape with onions. Your mouth waters even though you have no saliva. Then you stop being hungry. Your body gives up asking for what it can't have. You just feel weak, tired. Every movement takes enormous effort. Your mind gets foggy. You can't concentrate, can't think clearly. You stop caring about things. Hygiene doesn't matter. Appearance doesn't matter. Only the next meal matters, if there will be a next meal. People starve to death slowly, over months. Mostly the elderly and the very young. Their bodies just gave up. The UN called it a humanitarian crisis. We called it genocide in slow motion. Here's something people don't like to talk about. What you become when you're desperate enough. I stole food once, from a UN convoy that was being distributed. In the chaos of the distribution, with thousands of people pushing and shoving, I grabbed an extra box and ran. I'd never stolen anything in my life before that. I was a good kid, some polite, respectful, but I stole. Because my family was starving. I'm not proud of it. But I'd do it again. Everyone had their line, the thing they said they'd never do. And then the war pushed you past it. Some people collaborated with the besiegers, informed on their neighbors for a little extra food, for safety. Some people ran scams, selling fake medicines or watered-down gasoline at inflated prices. Some people hurt each other, took advantage, but most people just tried to help each other, share what little they had. Look out for the elderly neighbor who couldn't get to the water pump herself. Watch each other's children. The siege brought out the worst in some people and the best in others. I'd like to think it brought out more best than worst, that we stayed human, that we stayed Sarajevan. But it was hard. God, it was hard. I should talk about the people who fought, the defenders of the city, because while we were trying to survive inside, there were people actually fighting back, trying to break the siege, trying to protect us, the army of the Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Sounds official, right? Professional. It was mostly ordinary guys with hunting rifles and a few captured weapons. Factory workers, shopkeepers, teachers, students. My father joined them in a support role. He was too old for frontline combat, but he helped with logistics, organization. He'd be gone for days at a time, and we wouldn't know if he was alive. The defenders held impossible positions against an enemy with vastly superior firepower. They fought in the trenches around the city, in ruined buildings on the confrontation lines, in desperate conditions. They weren't all heroes. Some were. Some were just scared kids trying not to die. But they kept the Serb forces from entering the city. For 4 years, with almost nothing. That's worth remembering. There were female fighters too. Women who took up arms to defend their homes. Snipers, machine gunners, commanders. The siege wasn't just soldiers versus soldiers. It was a whole city under attack, and everyone who could fight did. Everyone else supported them however they could. You know what the worst part was? Maybe not the worst part. There were a lot of worst parts. But one of the worst? Knowing the world was watching and doing almost nothing. We'd see journalists sometimes. CNN crews. BBC, they'd come in. film the destruction, interview survivors, and then leave. We'd watch ourselves on television when we had electricity to power a TV and see our suffering turned into a news segment. 30 seconds of horror between weather and sports. The UN was there. UNPROFOR, United Nations Protection Force. They had soldiers, armored vehicles, supplies. They didn't protect us. They had a mandate to be neutral, to facilitate aid delivery, not to intervene. So they'd watch Serb forces shell the city from the hills and do nothing. They'd staff checkpoints and do nothing. They'd see massacres and do nothing. I don't blame the individual soldiers. Many of them were horrified by what they saw. Some tried to help in small ways. But the institution, the international community, they failed us. There were debates at the UN, strongly worded letters, sanctions, no-fly zones that didn't stop the shelling. Meanwhile, we died. Never again, they'd said after the Holocaust, after Rwanda, after every genocide, and yet here we were, in Europe, in the 1990s, being systematically killed, and the world just watched. Sometimes aid convoys would make it through. That was good. We needed them. But it felt like charity to ease their conscience rather than actual intervention to stop the killing. The contact I had with the outside world was through radio, occasional letters through the Red Cross, and stories from people who'd managed to leave and come back. I heard about my cousin who'd escaped to Germany. She was safe, going to school, living normally. It was like hearing about life on another planet. But you know what kept us going? Small things. Tiny moments of humanity. My mother singing while she cooked our meager dinner. Old folk songs from her childhood. My sister teaching herself English from a battered textbook, preparing for a future she insisted would come. Neighbors sharing a single cigarette, passing it around, pretending it was a cigarette break at a normal job. Finding a working tap and washing your face with cold water. The luxury of feeling clean, even for a moment. A ceasefire lasting long enough to walk to the end of the street without fear. Just walking, like a person. Someone sharing half their bread with you because they saw you were hungry. A stranger helping you carry water when they saw you struggling. Kids laughing. Even in hell, kids found reasons to laugh. There was this old man in our building, Mr. Kovacevic. He was Serbian, which didn't matter to any of us, but it shows the absurdity of the war. The people shelling us were supposedly defending Serbs like him, but he was trapped inside with the rest of us, equally endangered. He'd been a chess master before the war, and during the siege, he'd sit in the building's entrance, relatively safe from shelling, and teach chess to anyone who wanted to learn. I learned chess from him, spent hours moving pieces on a board he'd made from cardboard and bottle caps. It gave me something to think about other than fear and hunger. Strategy, planning, a problem I could actually solve. He died in his sleep during the third winter. Malnutrition, probably. Heart failure. He was only 68 but looked 90. We buried him in a park that had become an impromptu cemetery. So many bodies. Not enough space in proper graveyards. But we gave him a funeral. Said prayers. Honored him. Because that's what humans do. Even in hell. I'm going to tell you about my worst day. Not the worst day of the siege. There's too much competition for that title. My personal worst day. June 14th, 1995. It had been a relatively quiet morning, some distant shelling, but nothing close. My father was home, which was rare and wonderful. We were in the kitchen. My mother had managed to make a kind of cake from flour, sugar she'd hoarded, and some eggs we'd gotten from the aid distribution. It was my sister's birthday, her 17th. We were singing, quiet but singing, happy birthday. And then the world exploded. A shell hit the building next to ours. The blast wave blew in our windows. Shrapnel tore through the walls. The ceiling cracked. I remember flying backward, hitting the wall, my ears ringing so loud I couldn't hear anything else. When I could see again, there was dust everywhere. Smoke, the smell of explosives. My mother was on the floor, bleeding from her arm. My father was trying to get to her, shouting, but I couldn't hear him. My sister was under the table, screaming. We were alive. Incredibly, we were all alive. The family next door wasn't. I helped my father bandage my mother's arm. Shrapnel wound, nasty but not fatal. Then we went next door to help. The Hojic family, parents and 2 children. Their apartment was destroyed. We found them in the rubble. I'm not going to describe what we found. I can't. Even now, almost 30 years later, I can't. I helped carry their bodies out. 4 bodies. 4 people I'd known my entire life. We wrapped them in whatever cloth we could find and took them to be buried. That was my sister's 17th birthday. We never celebrated birthdays the same way again. By the summer of 1995, something was changing. The war in Croatia had shifted. The Croats and Bosniaks were cooperating more. The international community was finally getting tired of the embarrassment. The second Markale massacre in August pushed NATO to actually do something. Operation Deliberate Force launched on August 30th. NATO aircraft bombed Serb positions around Sarajevo, around Bosnia. For 2 weeks, we could hear it, feel it, the explosions in the hills, watching the places that had terrorized us for years getting hit. I'm not going to lie to you, it felt good. It felt like someone was finally helping us. The shelling of Sarajevo decreased dramatically. Not completely, but enough that you could walk around with a bit less fear. Negotiations intensified. The Dayton Accords. Peace talks in America. We didn't believe it. We'd had ceasefires before, promises before. But this time was different. On October 12, 1995, a ceasefire was declared. It mostly held. And on November 21st, 1995, the Dayton Accords were initialed. Officially signed in December. The war was over. The siege was over. 1,425 days. 3 years, 10 months, and 22 days. The longest siege in modern warfare. The siege ended, but the siege never really ended. You know what I mean? The Serb forces withdrew from the hills around the city. The checkpoints came down. The confrontation lines dissolved. You could leave Sarajevo if you wanted. Just walk out, drive out. The roads were open. But where would you go? Everything was destroyed. The whole country was shattered, and inside we were shattered too. Over 11,000 people killed in Sarajevo alone. Over 50,000 wounded. Every family had lost someone. Every person had trauma. The city was ruins. Buildings pockmarked with bullet holes, entire blocks destroyed, infrastructure collapsed, no jobs, no economy, just nothing. I remember walking through the city in January 1996, technically free, technically at peace. It didn't feel peaceful, it felt empty, hollow, like we'd survived but lost everything anyway. My mother never fully recovered. Physically, she healed. But mentally, the trauma was too deep. She became anxious, fearful. Loud noises would make her panic. She couldn't sleep without nightmares. My father threw himself into rebuilding efforts. I think work was his way of coping, of not thinking about what we'd endured. My sister left as soon as she could, moved to Austria, then Canada. She rarely comes back. Too many ghosts. I stayed. Someone had to. I went to university. Classes started again in 1996, in damaged buildings with broken windows, but they started. I studied engineering like my father. I helped rebuild, physically rebuild the city, the buildings, the bridges, the infrastructure, but also rebuild the society, the community, the trust. Because the worst part of the war wasn't the physical destruction. It was the social destruction. The siege had been prosecuted by Bosnian Serbs, many from Sarajevo itself or the surrounding areas. People we'd known, lived with, been friends with. How do you reconcile that? How do you trust again? Some people never did. They left, moved to countries where they didn't have to think about it. Others stayed and tried to believe in Bosnia again, in Sarajevo, in the idea that we could live together. It's still a work in progress. The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia was established. The ICTY, they prosecuted war criminals. Radovan Karadzic, the Bosnian Serb leader, was convicted of genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. He got 40 years, later increased to life. Ratko Mladic, the military commander, also got life. Good. They deserved it. But justice is cold comfort when your family is dead, when your childhood is gone, when your city is scarred forever. And so many smaller criminals never faced justice. They just went back to their lives. Some of them still live in Bosnia. I've probably passed them on the street. That's hard. That's very hard. The siege is memorialized now. The Tunnel Museum. The gallery. November 7th, 1995. The Sarajevo Roses in the pavement. Tourists come to see where we suffered, to learn about the war. I have mixed feelings about that. On one hand, I'm glad people want to learn, want to understand, want to remember. On the other hand, it's sanitized now, historical. You can visit the tunnel and imagine what it was like, but you can't really understand unless you were there, unless you lived it, unless you felt the fear, the hunger, the despair, unless you lost someone. But I guess that's true of all history. You can learn about it, but you can't truly know it. So what did I learn from 1,425 days in hell? I learned that civilization is fragile, that it can collapse faster than you think, that your neighbors can become your killers, that the world won't save you. I learned that humans are capable of enormous cruelty, but also enormous compassion. I learned that survival isn't heroic, it's just survival. You do what you have to do. You compromise, you adapt, you endure. I learned that children should never have to grow up like that. That innocence, once lost, can't be recovered. I learned that hunger changes you, fear changes you, trauma changes you. I learned that hope is both necessary and dangerous. Hope kept us going, but hope also made the disappointments hurt more. I learned that peace is precious, that boring normal days are a gift, that being able to walk to the store without fear is a luxury. I learned that I'm stronger than I thought I was, and more broken than I thought I could be. I learned that the siege will never really end for those of us who live through it. We carry it inside us, in our nightmares, in our reactions to loud noises, in our inability to waste food, in our distrust of authority, in our cynicism about international promises, but also in our resilience, in our dark humor, in our appreciation for small things, in our fierce love for Sarajevo. Because despite everything, I still love this city. It's scarred, it's imperfect, it's still dealing with the aftermath. But it's alive. We're alive. They tried to kill us, and we survived. That has to count for something. Today, Sarajevo looks almost normal. If you didn't know where to look, you might not see the scars. The buildings have been repaired. The parks have trees again. Cafes are full. Traffic jams even. Normal city problems. Young people who don't remember the war, who only know it from history books and their parents' stories. That's good. That's how it should be. But if you know where to look, the scars are still there. The Sarajevo Roses in the pavement. The cemetery where we buried our dead. The buildings still marked with bullet holes that nobody bothered to fix. And in the people. In those of us who lived through it. We're older now, middle-aged. Some of us have kids of our own. We try to be normal, to live normal lives. But sometimes a car backfires and you flinch. Sometimes a plane flies overhead and your heart races. Sometimes you hoard food without meaning to. Sometimes you can't sleep because the nightmares come back. The siege lives in us. I'm doing okay, if you're wondering. I'm married. I have 2 daughters. I work as an engineer, helping build new things instead of just repairing war damage. My daughters will never know what we went through. Not really. I've told them stories, but it's abstract to them. History. I'm glad for that. I don't want them to carry this weight. But I also need them to know, to understand that peace isn't guaranteed, that democracy isn't guaranteed, that civilization isn't guaranteed, that it all has to be protected, fought for, valued, because it can all be taken away, faster than you think. So why am I telling you this? Why am I reliving all of this pain? Because the world seems to be forgetting the lessons of the 1990s, of Yugoslavia, of Bosnia. Nationalism is rising again. Hatred of the other is becoming normalized. Politicians use divisive rhetoric to gain power. Borders are being questioned. Democracies are being eroded. I see the same patterns, the same warning signs, and I'm terrified. Because I know where it leads. It leads to ordinary people doing extraordinary evil, to neighbors killing neighbors, to children growing up in fear, to years of suffering that could have been prevented. The Siege of Sarajevo wasn't inevitable. The Yugoslav wars weren't inevitable. They happened because people made choices, because hatred was stoked, because demagogues seized power, because the international community was slow to act. All of that is preventable. But only if we learn, only if we remember, only if we refuse to let it happen again. That's why I'm telling you this story. Not because I want sympathy, not because I want to be seen as a hero. I'm not a hero, I'm just someone who survived. But because I need you to understand that this can happen anywhere, anytime, to anyone. Sarajevo was a modern, civilized, multicultural city, and it became a war zone in a matter of weeks. Your city isn't special, your country isn't immune, your peace isn't guaranteed. So protect it, value it, defend it. Don't let demagogues divide you. Don't let fear and hatred guide your politics. Don't be complacent. Because I've seen what happens when people are complacent. I've seen what happens when good people do nothing. I've seen what happens when the world watches and waits too long. I've lived through 1,425 days of hell, and I'm telling you, it can happen again. Don't let it. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. Thank you for caring enough to hear my story. Our story. The story of Sarajevo. I know it wasn't easy. This isn't a fun video to watch. There's no uplifting ending, no Hollywood resolution, just the truth. The truth that war is hell, that siege is slow death, that humans can be monsters and angels, sometimes the same person on different days. If this story affected you, if it made you think, I have a few requests. First, learn more. Read about the Yugoslav wars, about the Siege of Sarajevo, about the people who lived and died there. Don't let us be forgotten. Second, speak up against hatred and division in your own communities. Don't let the early warning signs go unchallenged. Be the person who says no when others are silent. Third, support organizations that help war survivors and refugees. There are people around the world living through sieges right now, in Syria, in Yemen, in Ukraine. They need help. Fourth, vote. Participate in democracy. Hold leaders accountable, because democracy dies when good people disengage. And finally, cherish peace. Cherish your boring normal days. Cherish your ability to walk to the store safely, to sleep without fear, to live without calculating sniper angles. These things are precious. Don't take them for granted. I'm Amir. I survived 1,425 days of the Siege of Sarajevo. This was my story. Ne zaboravi. Don't forget. Thank you for listening. If you want to support this channel and hear more stories like this, please like, subscribe, and share. Leave a comment with your thoughts. I try to read them all. And if you're struggling with trauma or mental health issues related to war or conflict, please reach out for help. There are resources available. You don't have to carry it alone. Links in the description. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Peace.